Hello, everyone. My name is Jackie Maestri. I'm the Vice President of Engineering and Property Services at Johnson & Johnson, and I am so happy to be here today with you all. Johnson & Johnson is extremely proud to sponsor this exciting event for the International Science and Engineering Fair. For 70 years, ISEF has served as the world's premier STEM competition, providing an international stage for the world's best and brightest young scientists. Although this event was originally planned live in Anaheim, California, the COVID-19 pandemic has forced us all to think differently and has created opportunities to be more agile. That's why, for the very first time, the ISEF Fair is being conducted virtually. The global pandemic has led Johnson & Johnson to be more agile and think differently as well. As the world's largest and most broadly based healthcare company, we're dedicated to improving health for humanity and are currently mobilizing our deep scientific expertise and global reach to mitigate and hopefully conquer the COVID-19 pandemic, while meeting the needs of families, communities, healthcare providers, and our employees throughout the crisis. As we speak, J&J is engaged in a fast-paced journey to develop a vaccine and produce up to 1 billion doses by early next year, which requires a strong cross-functional collaboration between scientists, engineers, and many others to implement the large-scale manufacturing needed to address this global public health need, all while we continue to supply the important products our patients and consumers need today. COVID is not the first disease or global pandemic that J&J has experienced, faced, and ultimately helped defeat. As our chairman and CEO, Alex Gorsky, has noted, Johnson & Johnson was built for times like these. I am excited to introduce our session today and provide you with a brief backstage look at our COVID-19 research and development efforts with Johnson & Johnson's new series, The Road to a Vaccine, which highlights the essential role of STEM in advancing human health. This video series features scientists and health experts from around the world, pulling back the curtain to share our progress on vaccine development and shed light on today's COVID headlines. Johnson & Johnson's purpose is to blend heart, science, and ingenuity to profoundly change the trajectory of health for humanity. And we know that in order to make this a reality, we need to be dedicated to advancing STEM education, particularly for women. One of our outreach programs is We STEM to D, or Women in STEM Initiative. We want to ensure that Johnson & Johnson continues to have a strong stream of STEM talent to continue our legacy of health for humanity, continue to ideate and develop the life-saving and life-enhancing products customers and patients around the world need, and continue to provide strong leadership to the world in times of crisis. And with that, I hand it over to my colleague, Seema Kumar.
Thank you, Jackie, and hi, everybody. I'm Seema Kumar. I am Vice President for Innovation, Global Health and Science Policy Communication at Johnson & Johnson, and it's a real pleasure to host today's conversation about how COVID-19 is actually putting a sharp spotlight of the role of science in society. Just a little about myself. I grew up in India, and when I was growing up in India, I always was, it was impressed upon me the power of science and technology. And I have seen it personally firsthand, how science and technology can improve people's lives in so many different ways. But today we suffer from an explosion of information, and sometimes it can be really hard to separate fact from fiction, especially in the areas of science and technology, which are very complex. And even though science touches our everyday lives in so many different ways, it can be hard for people to relate to scientists and what scientists are saying and even understand the language of science. But the COVID-19 pandemic has put a very sharp focus on science and put science front and center in front of the general public. And people want to understand the science behind the coronavirus, hear from scientists more than anybody else about the possible solutions. And in fact, scientists are replacing pop stars as household names. It gave me great pleasure to see Brad Pitt playing Tony Fauci on Saturday Night Live. And I think that just goes to show how scientists can actually be in the spotlight, especially because they're so needed, scientists as well as medical care professionals. Now, that said, the unprecedented nature of the coronavirus has shown that scientists, doctors, policymakers don't always have immediate answers, because we're also learning as we go along more about the virus, how it impacts people, what are all the various symptoms. I mean, we see the evolution in learning of what we know about the coronavirus and how it impacts us. And so I think even more so than before in this environment, science communications and engaging the public in science has become much more essential as people seek to understand how this unseen enemy is impacting our lives in unimaginable ways. So, to make transparent what science is all about and to bring people along on the journey and make it more inclusive, and to boost public engagement in science is something that we thought about a lot at Johnson & Johnson. In fact, we wanted to make sure that this is not about sort of the end outcome alone. It's also about the journey and about bringing people along on the journey, and also pulling the curtain back and show behind the scenes of what's happening. So that is how was born the Johnson & Johnson new series, The Road to a Vaccine. And we've partnered with journalist Lisa Ling to put together the series, which is available to everyone via LinkedIn, Facebook, JNJ.com. And what I want to do is I want to play a quick promo about the show. But first, I want to just talk about three amazing women with whom I will be having a conversation. First, we have Dr. Peggy Hamburg, Margaret Hamburg, who has just dedicated her entire career to public service, to public health, from serving as Commissioner of New York Department of Health to Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, to leading the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And she continues to be on the front lines of telling the public what they need to know about the coronavirus and the public health emergency that we're going through right now. I also have Dr. Rink, Abbas, who is a scientist at Janssen, at the pharmaceutical companies of Johnson & Johnson. She's based in the Netherlands, and she's leading a team that is working on designing and developing J&J's COVID-19 vaccine candidate. And so she actually works in the lab designing, she was responsible for designing the constructs from which we selected the lead candidate that's now we're testing. And then finally, Dr. Anvita Gupta, who recently launched her own biotech startup, AI Novo Biotech Incorporated, which uses artificial intelligence and synthetic biology to transform therapeutics and diagnostics development. And Anvita is a recent graduate of Stanford University and ISEF 2012 alumna. But more than that, Anvita, I first met Anvita when she was a high school student, and she won the BioGenius Award at the Bio International Convention. And from then to see her take her career on this trajectory is just extraordinary. And so what we thought we would do today is, first of all, take a quick look at the road to a vaccine. We want to talk about why it's important to engage society in the enterprise of science, but also talk about the role of women in science all at the same time. So with that, can we first play the promo?
Hi, I'm Lisa Ling, and I'm hosting a groundbreaking new live series, The Road to a Vaccine, exploring the COVID-19 crisis and the road to develop a vaccine candidate. Each week, we'll talk to the world's leading scientists and experts and answer your questions live. So join me each Tuesday right here on Johnson & Johnson's LinkedIn.
Rika, can I ask you the first question? What inspired you to go into a career in science? Tell us a little bit about what you do and what your role is at Janssen.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Well, what inspired me to go into science, I started quite a long time ago already. I always liked to solve puzzles, challenges with a group of people, come up with hypotheses, and then try to find a solution together. So I started my career in immunology when I selected my PhD project in tumor immunology. I also did a postdoc in tumor immunology, really focusing on studying vaccines or immunotherapy to treat or even prevent cancer. And when I joined Janssen Vaccines, I switched to studying vaccines targeting infectious diseases. And so I work in the discovery department of Janssen Vaccines. And in our department, all the projects for vaccines actually start with us, because we have to, we design the vaccine, we do the first testing. Typically, we make a lot of different designs, and it takes a year or two to test all those different designs and compare them. And then eventually we will select one candidate that will go then in production for clinical testing. For COVID-19, it's very different. When in January the news about the virus came out, we realized immediately we had to start working on it. I mean, we know how to make vaccines, we have the capacity to make vaccines. So we started to work on it immediately in January. And quite soon already, we realized that we couldn't really lose a day, that we had to keep going, because it was emerging very quickly. So at that time, we, similar for other programs, we designed different candidates because we weren't sure yet what would be the best design. There was not much known about the virus in January. We started to test those different designs. But now, because we realized we couldn't lose time, we started also other things in parallel that we would normally not start that early. So we started to prepare already for clinical testing, and also now other departments within Janssen Vaccine already started very early to prepare for large-scale production for clinical trials, but also for emergency use later this year, or the 1 billion doses that we anticipate to prepare for next year. So we have been quite busy since January. We are very hopeful because we have selected our lead candidate. So one of the designs we selected now to really start producing large scale for clinical trials. And we anticipate to start the clinical trials in around August.
So Rinka, when you were maybe let's say in October when you were working in Janssen, or when in November, did you think that this is what you were going to be doing in January, February, March?
No, it was, I worked on different projects. We have an HIV vaccine in clinical trials. We have influenza vaccines. We have an RSV vaccine in clinical trials. So we were working on many different projects. We had no clue that this would happen. And even still in January, when we started to work on it, we realized we had to work on it, that it was important, but we all imagined that it would be a vaccine that, end up on the shelf, or that we would have more time to study it before we would actually go in production for clinical trials. It normally we take 1 or 2 years to really test the candidates, to really select one to go forward, and to invest the time and resources to already start preparing for clinical trials. When the virus started to spread so fast, then we realized it was really necessary to do a lot of things in parallel and to speed up our timelines.
So not only have you been thrust in the front lines in terms of preparing and creating and designing vaccine constructs, but you've also been thrust in front of the media and television, having to explain the science that you're doing to the public. So let's take a quick look at the clip that you did for Road to a Vaccine, and then maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that experience has been like to bring people along on the journey of your work. So Let's play the next segment.
Hi, Dr. Abbas. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to get right into it. Can you explain to us what exactly is a vaccine and how does it work?
Thanks, Lisa. Well, I'll first explain the difference between a vaccine and medicine. So it's important to know the difference. Medications are being used to treat patients, even cure patients, but these people are already sick. But of course, it would be better if we could prevent people from getting sick. So that's what vaccines can do. And we have learned over many years that vaccines can actually do that. We know that we have very effective vaccines, for example, against the measles, against rubella. We even eradicated smallpox. So a vaccine can really do that. So how would that work for the coronavirus? The coronavirus has spikes on the outside of the virus, and those spikes are needed to enter the cell. So for a vaccine, we would want to induce antibodies that can bind to those spikes to prevent the virus to enter the cell. So if you take the genetic code of that spike protein and you can put that in a vaccine, when you can inject the vaccine into healthy people, your own body will start making this spike protein. The vaccine gives a signal to the immune system, and it will start producing antibodies against that spike protein. Your immune system is also very smart. It actually has a memory. So even after months or years after you have received the vaccine, if at that point you get the virus into your body, your immune system remembers that it had seen that spike protein earlier, before. So it will start making these antibodies really fast. And then these antibodies can bind the spike protein on the virus and can prevent the virus from entering the cell and prevent you from getting sick from the virus.
Rink, this was one of the best explanations I have heard of what a vaccine is and how it works. Did you practice a lot, or did that just come naturally to you to explain what a vaccine does?
Oh, thanks. Thanks for the compliment. I heard it many times, and I got so many compliments, and I didn't realize how much impact it would be for me to just explain what we do, what a vaccine is. For me, it's kind of the basics of immunology. So when I was approached for a road to a vaccine, I said, yeah, sure, nice. I would love to contribute and explain what we do. But I had so many positive reactions from people that, oh, wow, now I finally understand what a vaccine does and what you do. And so, yeah, I'm happy I could contribute to that, and that people have a lot of interest now in vaccines. I think it's great that we can explain now what vaccines do. I mean, there's also a lot of negative news about vaccines. So now, all this attention for science, for vaccines, also for pharmaceutical companies, I think it's a great opportunity for us to tell people why we do this, how we do it, to get a better understanding of the process.
Thank you, Rinka. Peggy, we've been doing lots of interviews, media interviews, talking about vaccines, and I know you have been too. Does it surprise you? It surprised me that we had to go back to basics and explain what a vaccine is, and that you don't treat patients, you actually vaccinate people. Back to the basics. Has that been your experience, and did it surprise you?
Well, it's been interesting throughout this whole COVID-19 experience to see how quickly the public is learning a lot about science, medical care, and how we develop new drugs and vaccines. And yes, I think one of the important points that people perhaps didn't initially appreciate in thinking about the development of a vaccine is that, as was noted just now in that wonderful description of how a vaccine works, you're giving vaccines to people that are otherwise healthy to protect them from a disease. So it's so important to make sure that we really understand that the vaccine works and that it's safe. And we also will be giving vaccines to people across a range of ages and a range of medical conditions. There may be people who have other medical problems or have a history of a serious medical issue or taking other products, whatever, but that may make them sometimes respond a little bit differently. Their immune system may be less robust or may be more hyperactive. So that it is really important that we not only study the vaccine in a limited number of patients or individuals to make sure that we understand how well it works and what the safety issues are, so we can assess the risks and benefits before moving it out into the marketplace. But also we think about all the range of people that may be using it at some point.
So in all of the work that you've been doing just post COVID in the past 3 months, have you seen a change in terms of perception of the role of scientists and the role of society in their engagement with science? Do you think that this will inspire young women to get into careers in science and young girls and boys to get into careers in science?
Well, I certainly hope so. And events like this hopefully are part of that process of both inspiration and acknowledgement of accomplishments. Even though there are very young scientists, it's still remarkable the level of sophistication and understanding of people today that are interested in STEM. But there are probably a lot of people that don't get the exposure early on, either through school or in their homes or in other things they're doing, don't understand the excitement of science and don't understand the importance of science and don't understand that they too can, in fact, do science. And I think one of the things that COVID-19 has really been able to do is show the public and policymakers as well how much science matters, because it is science and harnessing the advances in science and technology today that will help give us the drugs and the vaccines, importantly, that will enable us to manage, control, and perhaps really extinguish this terrible ongoing pandemic of a novel coronavirus, and to be able to return to life as we knew it before. So there is a newfound appreciation in the importance of science and how much it really matters. But I think we also have to be careful not to overpromise, because people's expectations are very high. And the truth is, everybody is looking for a magic bullet. There will not be a magic bullet. Science does take time and hard work in order to be able to fully translate it into products that will make a difference for people in this country and around the world.
That's so well put. And you recently talked about some of this in the Road to a Vaccine show, and we're going to play a clip of that now. Let's roll the tape.
In the case of COVID-19, because of the urgency of the problem and the magnitude of it, many of the steps are really sort of being collapsed, and people are willing, companies are willing to move more quickly. And even as many, many different candidate vaccines are now under development and going into human studies, people are already thinking about how are we going to scale up and manufacture in the volumes that are going to be necessary to address a global pandemic. So we're going in record speed from the time that the genome of this novel coronavirus was first posted in early January by Chinese scientists to the first injection of a vaccine candidate into a human. It was just a little over 9 weeks, which is an absolute record in terms of vaccine development. We're seeing rapid progress. Everyone has their fingers crossed. There's been unusual collaboration across all sectors and across borders. The mobilization of the scientific community to try to address this problem. Everyone recognizes that at the end of the day, it is a successful vaccine or vaccines that will really provide the blanket of protection that we need to make us go back to some kind of new normal again.
one of the things that we found with this particular show is how engaged people are and how much people want to learn about what's going on. And we've had an audience views of more than 80,000 each week from all over the globe. And it's because there's a huge thirst for information. And Peggy, you've always been a champion of engaging the public in science and engaging and encouraging scientists to be more out there talking to the public. Do you think that things will change moving forward, that there will be a new normal, not only in the way we live, but in the way we think about science and the involvement of society in science?
Well, I hope so, and I hope it will be positive. There are some negatives that we're seeing as well. There's a lot of misinformation out there, intentional disinformation out there as well, as we are faced with this flood of information with all of the social media platforms, the 24-hour cable TV, and all the other sources of information. But for the most part, I think it's been extremely positive. I think that the media has helped scientists to get out there and learn to talk to the public about their work. And we've got great examples. You just had Rink demonstrating how well scientists can communicate to everyone about their work when they fully understand it and they're passionate about it, and it makes a difference. I think one of the things that's going to have to come out of this as well is for the public to really come to understand the scientific method. And that's different than sort of being interested and excited by science. It's also understanding that science moves in an iterative process. You try something, you see how it works, you learn from it, then you try something else or you build on that new knowledge. And science does involve failures, and failures don't mean that you've done something terrible, that you've made a huge mistake and you should hang your head and think, I'm not good at this. Failure is part of the scientific process, and we all fail, and you shouldn't be afraid to fail, but people need to understand that when, scientific information changes as we learn more, that's not a failure of science. That's not because someone, gave you misinformation. It's because we continue to learn and our knowledge continues to grow. So learning about the scientific method is very important, but also being able to distinguish good science from bad science is so important, and that can be very hard for us all.
Thank you, Peggy. That's very, very important for people to figure out how to separate, because understanding science helps you separate fact from fiction and really understand what the process is, but also how to evaluate results. So thank you. And Anvita, to you, I remember meeting you as a high school student, and even then you were interested really in figuring out how to harness science and technology to advance human health. And now you are the CEO of your own company, which you started. And so you have a passion for not only doing science, but also sharing your love for science. Tell us a little bit about your journey from, student to science entrepreneur, and why you believe in making science accessible to everyone and everywhere.
Thank you so much, Seema, for the introduction. Yeah, I know it's been quite a while, but it's funny because my journey with science started out actually with science fairs and science fairs like ISEF. For many, many years of my life, I wanted nothing to do with business. I wanted to be a doctor, a pediatrician specifically. And so I always had this interest in human health. But I wanted to participate in ISEF for the first year when I was in like 10th grade or something like that. And I found that I couldn't make the trip to a lab every day to do actual biological research. And so I started looking at how to use the tools that were available to me, namely the computer, and start seeing, how I could explore how to improve human health with the tools that I had. And really the internet and all the resources we have available nowadays help so much in making science accessible for me. And I really just fell in love with the way that you could use computer science to find more elegant approaches to drug discovery, to diagnostics. And I did a project for Biogenius, which is where I met Seema, on using computer science to find new drugs for cancer, tuberculosis, and Ebola. At that time, the Ebola pandemic was going on. And it's been interesting to see the differences in response to the Ebola epidemic, and then now with COVID-19. At that time, I got to present my research to President Obama at the White House, which was amazing. And the White House put together an Ebola Innovator Summit, which I got to present at as well. And there you could see that people in policy decisions were thinking a lot about how to use new technologies to accelerate innovation for infectious diseases. But still, it really hadn't taken hold in the public consciousness that, a pandemic like this could ever actually happen to us sitting here in the US. And so now you see science thrust into a much greater light with people, scientists becoming household names, everybody debating, the clinical trial results as they come out, which I think is really interesting. So, with my new company, AI Novo Biotech Inc., what we are basically doing is looking at how to harness artificial intelligence and high performance computing, which has come out recently, to speed up the discovery of proteins which are used in COVID-19 diagnostics. For instance, we have a project going on with that for COVID-19 therapeutics. Really, the whole pandemic has made us think and made me think about the way that we can use our technology, not just for diseases like cancer, but really hone in on this public health crisis and use our work to help accelerate innovation for public good, and really in real time help with this.
That's wonderful. So how can AI, briefly tell us, how can AI help us? Give us an example of the types of things AI can do, whether it's in diagnostics or in treatments, in therapy.
Yeah, there are a lot of very interesting new ways that are coming out. For instance, a lot of the components which are used in serology tests to tell whether people are immune to COVID-19 or not, or components used in different sorts of antigen-based tests to tell whether people have COVID-19 or not. They require these specific proteins, which are called antibodies. I don't know if my response will be as easy to explain as Dr. Rinka's was, because that was very good with the vaccine explanation. But I will attempt to kind of give an overview. That basically you can use AI to do protein design for these antibodies, and basically instead of producing antibodies in animals or producing them in phage display libraries, which you have to look at millions of antibodies and basically select, okay, I think this one will be specific for the COVID-19 antigen of interest. Can you instead use artificial intelligence and deep learning to design an antibody specifically for the antigen you're looking at, by learning from millions of data points on the computer, basically do virtual screening instead of having to do screening in the lab.
Well, good luck with all the work that you're doing. So I want to turn the question really now to one quick question for all of you, and then I think we'll do maybe one more question and do audience Q&A. So we're, with science festivals and science fairs, the goal obviously is to engage the next generation of scientists into the scientific enterprise. So tell us a little bit about your story of what first attracted you to a career in science. How did you fall in love with science? And how do you keep with that love and stick with it, for the long haul? So maybe Rinka, we start with you, and then Peggy, and then Anvita.
So yeah, when I started in science, I was very excited, and you just get more excited every time because you learn new things, you meet more people, you get into different research and different topics, you kind of automatically being led into a way that you don't really have to choose. It's just you just follow your interest, and it will take you to new topics or to new research. So I've been I really like trying to find out new things, doing it also with a team. Also the scientific community, it's very nice to be a part of, going to conferences, share your work, discuss with other people. Everybody's always willing to share. So I think it's a great environment to work in, and it's a lot of fun, and it's always exciting. It will I don't think it will ever I will ever get bored, because there will be new things coming out every day. So you will always be busy learning new things.
Thank you.
Now at this time it's a bit hard with the COVID-19. It's hard to keep up with the literature. There's so many new publications now. But also, as was already mentioned, that there's also a lot of publications that are quite poor science. So now it's more difficult also to select the correct information.
That's thank you, Rinka. Peggy, what about you?
Well, I have just been so fortunate throughout my career and in my growing up and exposure to science. I actually grew up right on the Stanford campus. Both of my parents were on the faculty and did research and taught and took care of patients at the medical school. And I was surrounded by world-class scientists. They were, friends and colleagues of my parents. They were the parents of my friends. I had no idea. I thought, lots of people got Nobel Prizes, for example. But I certainly learned growing up with those people about the excitement of science and the gratifications of doing the work and sharing that work with students and others, and the rewards of taking care of patients as well. When I went off to college was really the first time I thought about not going into medical science, and I thought I wanted in medical science to do research, teaching, and patient care. But when I got to college, I had a roommate who was very interested in journalism, and all of a sudden I thought, wow, this is really interesting, and journalism lets you sort of dabble in a lot of things and always be learning new things. I thought about that. I thought about law. I thought about various arts, art history, drama. But I kept coming back to science and medicine, and and I realized that was really where my heart was. What was then very interesting was that my career took a turn I don't think I could have predicted, that relates to another unfolding global pandemic, and that was being in medical school as we watched the HIV/AIDS epidemic unfold. And that was a time when actually we were being told, that really the future of medicine was chronic disease because of the advent of drugs and vaccines, that the era of infectious diseases was more or less coming to a close. And then this strange disease that nobody really understood what caused it, and nobody knew what to call it, emerged. It was, of course, HIV/AIDS, a terrible, then always fatal disease caused by a virus. But as I went through medical school and learned more about the disease, and then as a medical resident taking care of patients in New York City, the devastation of that disease was enormous. We didn't have effective drugs to treat it. We could only provide supportive care, and people, young, previously healthy people, died these terrible deaths. But I saw the intersection of that disease with social issues, legal issues, ethical issues, economic issues. And it really made me decide that I wanted to work at the intersection of all of those things. I wanted to actually explore public health, which I didn't know much about at all. And I really wanted to have a career that spanned the range of issues and really tried to put a spotlight on science and society, and really tried to bring the benefits and opportunities inherent in science to desperate situations where by improving health, you could improve so many other things as well.
That's phenomenal. And gosh, just looking back to the 1980s and where we were with HIV and where we have come, it's extraordinary. Again, the science and technology and the collaboration across multiple sectors is what, brought us here today. What about you, Anvita? What made you go into a career in science?
Yeah, I'd say I was always interested in science from a young age, problem solving. What really for me was the presence of strong female role models in my life, who were always there to support my interest in science. My mom is a chemical engineer, so she was always very supportive of my interest in computer science and medicine, whatever it may be. And I think that really made a difference for me. I remember when I took my first computer science class in 10th grade, 3/4 of the girls dropped out of my class. And the girls who were dropping out had better grades than the boys who were staying in the class. And I think, upon
why do you think that was?
Yeah, I think a lot of it had to do with confidence, this making sure that we tell young women that science is for them and that it's an interesting and impactful career, that you can really have a difference on the world. And I have done a lot of teaching. I started a nonprofit to help young girls in science called Litas for Girls. And what I saw time and time again is that you need strong female role models to nurture children's interest in science. You need constant reminders of, the impact that science can have and that it is fulfilling and exciting as a career, to really encourage diversity in science. And diversity in science is so needed when we come to issues like COVID-19, where you really need all the voices, really all the diverse perspectives in order to find solutions to crises. So,
that's a great point. Let me just take a quick, I'm going to ask Peggy and Rink to comment on this notion of women and diversity in science and the importance of role models. And then I see several questions from the audience and we can go to that. So Peggy and then Rinka, any comments on inclusion in science and importance of role models? And Peggy, obviously you are such a great role model yourself, and Rinka, all three of you are.
Well, certainly now that I'm in the later stages of my career, I really do try to spend a lot of time mentoring students, particularly girls and women, because I think it is so crucial. I had the great good fortune, as I mentioned, to have a mother who, in fact, went into science and was a medical doctor. She trained in pediatrics and child psychiatry. And not only was she a bit unusual in terms of having such a successful career in medical science when she did, but she was also a pioneer in other ways. She was African American, raised by a single mother, and was the first African American woman to be accepted at Vassar College and the first African American woman to go to Yale Medical School. So she really showed me that you can break down barriers and be successful when you know what you want and you're good at it. She did, I used to tease her, make it all look a little bit too easy. But she was, my best role model. In medical school and in my residency training, I wished I'd had better role models that were women, and women in both leadership roles, but also women who would take an interest in me and my career and be supportive. It was surprising to me that there were a few, and I, actually have stayed in touch with some of them, one of whom is now over 100 years old. But but I'm happy to see that I think that at least in medicine, there are many more women in medical school classes. There are many more women in leadership within academic institutions. Sadly, I think the biopharma world, women have had a harder time rising to positions at the very top of the executive leadership. So I'm so pleased to be on this panel with a CEO of a biotech company and a very young and impressive one at that.
Great. Rinka, what about like in the Netherlands? What's it like over there?
Yeah, I was thinking about diversity and inclusion, and I think there's great diversity in science. I'm working now in the Netherlands, but I also worked in La Jolla in the US for 8 years. And I think especially in science, people travel all over the world and they can work wherever they want to work because science is the same everywhere. So I think, that's really great about science as well. You meet a lot of people from all over the world, different nationalities, very interesting people. And even in the Netherlands, in our department here, also in academic labs, there's a lot of international people. So I think that's great about science. I do agree with in the pharma company itself. We have in my department a lot of women. The head of our department is a woman, Hanneke Schuitenmaker. So she's a great role model. But indeed, at the executive levels, it's still mainly men. So I think their diversity can be improved.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. And since you have the floor, Rinka, now as we go to the audience questions, I want to throw the first question at you, maybe, and then have others comment if we have an additional comment. So the first question is, how exactly can the genome of the virus be found? And when it's done, how does it contribute to finding a vaccine? Now, that's just, that's what happened with the coronavirus genome being sequenced. So can you answer that question for us?
Yeah, sure. I do realize it's becoming a bit dark here. I'm in the Netherlands, so it's later in the evening, so it's getting dark outside. So luckily the sequence of the virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, was shared very quickly in January already. Sequencing of genomes is going so fast now. The technology has improved so much. It's not been that long ago that it took a long time to get a whole sequence of a genome, and now it's done within a few hours. So that's really amazing. And as soon as you have that genome, you can start looking at the parts of the virus that you are interested in for making a vaccine. And because we knew this was a coronavirus, and we know from coronaviruses that the spike proteins are important, we immediately focused on the spike protein. So we looked at the sequence of the spike protein, and based on that sequence, we could design the vaccine.
Great, thank you. Peggy, anything you want to add to that?
No, just that was a wonderful example of scientific collaboration, that this virus first emerged in China, and the Chinese scientists working on it did post the genome very early, and that enabled scientists and researchers all around the world to get a fast start on really understanding much more about the virus and beginning to develop important activities like vaccines.
So thank you. The next question is, why can viruses only have preventive vaccines, but no actual cures, or a way to actually rid the body of the virus from a person? Who wants to take that?
I can take that one. I think there are also therapeutic vaccines in development. So not only preventive vaccines, it's just more complicated to make a vaccine to actually treat people, because then the virus has already infected your cells. and the mechanism is also different. So it's the best way is to prevent yourself from getting infected, and you can do that by making antibodies. So with a preventive vaccine, you make antibodies that can stop the virus from entering the cell. It just prevents the infection, and then you can also prevent the spreading of the virus between people. With a therapeutic vaccine, you also need the antibodies, but then also T cells become more important, because then you want the cells that have been infected with the virus, you want those cells to be removed from the body. So for that, you need different immune mechanisms in your body, and therefore T cells are also more important. So there are, for certain diseases, also therapeutic vaccines. I mentioned I worked in tumor immunology as well, so I worked also on testing, developing vaccines to treat cancer, to stimulate the immune system, and also for other diseases, for HPV or other viruses. You can think about also developing therapeutic vaccines, but it's more complicated. And it really depends on the stage of the infection in the body, if you are still in time to remove all those infected cells.
Thank you. I see here a question about nanotechnology, and there are numerous examples of nanotechnology in the development of coronavirus vaccines and therapeutics. And to what extent are the tools of nanotechnology influencing your research? Do you want to take that? Anvita, does nanotechnology come into the mix for you, or is it purely AI focused and computational focused?
Well, nanotechnology comes in diagnostics quite a bit.
Yeah.
When you want to create a cheap, rapid diagnostic for COVID-19, you need to conjugate often whatever antibodies you have that are detecting the virus. You need to conjugate the viral antigens. You need to conjugate those antibodies with gold nanoparticles, magnetic nanoparticles, so that you can detect when they actually do bind to the virus and find it. So there are lots of uses of nanotechnology in diagnostics.
Let me ask you all, there's a question here about, what actually inspires you to stay on with science, and related to that is another question that maybe I will throw first to Peggy. Peggy, one of the most rewarding moments of your career, what was that?
Well, that's a very hard question, because there have been very different moments. I would have to say that one moment that was very, very rewarding was when I was actually taking care of medical patients. And I'll have to confess that I did not follow the guidance of my attending physician. A patient with advanced Hodgkin's disease came in and had a very bad headache, and some other symptoms too. And this patient had been through a lot of chemotherapy and other treatments. And the attending physician, this is at Memorial Sloan Kettering, sort of wanted to sort of manage the patient supportively, but not make the patient uncomfortable. And so he said, don't do anything invasive. I talked with the patient and I explained what the headache might reflect. And he said, and I explained, how you would find out if in fact there was an infection that was in the spinal fluid and the brain, which is not uncommon in immune compromised individuals. And he said, he wanted, if it might be something that was treatable, he wanted to know. And so I did the spinal tap. And in fact, the patient had a fungal meningitis and a very high concentration of the fungus, very high titer. It was treated. The patient responded beautifully. And that patient remained in touch with me for the rest of his life because he was so grateful. And it really was a moment when I felt that I had really arrived, when I trusted my medical judgment. I was able to speak with the patient about their wishes. And even though the attending physician had not encouraged me, and in fact it said, not, just make the patient comfortable, he agreed that making the patient comfortable, treating the infection and saving their life was the right thing to do.
That's phenomenal. What a great story. That's wonderful. And assume that patient is still alive. And
no, that patient is not still alive. But remember, I was an intern decades ago. So, but the patient lived for a long time after that.
That's a wonderful story. Let me ask Anvita. Anvita, you're still at the early stages of your career, but so far, what has been the most rewarding experience?
Yeah, I was going to say it's a bit early for me to give an answer to that, but I find it really rewarding when I have led classes in the past to teach young girls about science, and to see a student go from, thinking that they can't install a program to building their own website, or, coming up with ideas for problems that they want to solve using science. That's really been rewarding to me, is being able to inspire a love of science in other people any way I can.
And Rinka, what about you? I'm guessing that right now you're in the middle of the vaccine process for COVID, and that someday you're going to look upon this, regardless of where we end up, that this will be one of the most rewarding. But I'll let you answer. Up until now, what has been one of the most rewarding moments?
Yeah, I think it's more also on a personal level, or more being a team leader. So not per se the science itself, but leading a team, motivating people, having them feel them respected and appreciated. I think, and also now in these times, I think that's very important. And if you then get the compliments also from your own team, that they feel safe and appreciated, I think that's a great reward.
That's great. So I think we are on the hour, and I believe that we're at time, but this has just been an extraordinary conversation with remarkable women, 3 remarkable women. And I hope to continue the conversation in other fora. But in the meantime, I wanted to thank Jackie for all of her partnership with the science and society, and also the festival. Have a very nice day. Keep healthy, stay safe, and talk to you all soon. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.